So, if you watched my last video, you would know that my first ever introduction to Transformers as a franchise was in 2007 with Michael Bay's live-action iteration. For those who watched those series of films, you would know the creators went all out in most aspects except for the writing. This resulted in lots of problems, one of which are the over-exaggerated characters, with the Decepticons being the worst offenders of this problem. The Decepticons and Bayformers were just cartoonishly evil with no obvious justification for it. They're so evil, in fact, that the Autobots and humans in the movies had to adopt some of their war crime tactics in order to win their fights. The rest of my thoughts on Bayformers can be saved for a later video, but my point is that I never really saw what a well-written Transformers movie would look like. Even the rebooted live-action films, while miles better than Bayformers, don't really have what I believe to be excellent writing. But then came Transformers 1. In my opinion, this is the best Transformers movies to date. Is it the most successful financially? Far from it, unfortunately. But that doesn't affect my opinion at all. And one of the reasons why is because the movie was written where the characters and their arcs are put front and center. While each of the major characters had well-written story arcs, the best one out of all of them was D16, later known as Megatron by the end of the film. D16's arc is a well-executed example of how one ordinary person, a subordinate in an unequal society, can grow to become a powerful, destructive force to be reckoned with. And in my view, his story, along with Orion's story, are cautionary tales of what could potentially happen and what has happened before with our own society. Now, before we dissect D16's character arc, we have to look at Orion Pax's arc first, because keep in mind, D16's story would not have been as potent, if not possible, without Orion Pax's story. Orion has, one might say, the standard hero's journey in a story. They start out looking for a call to adventure, quite literally in this case. He, along with D16, B127, and Alita, got that call, and that resulted in all of them learning the dark truth of their society, and the desire to change it. All of them were given power from a mentor-like figure through Alpha Trion to change their status quo. Orion Pax used the power he had to rally support against the ruler, Sentinel Prime, and expose the dark truth to everyone in Iacon. From that point, Orion's goal was to reform Cybertron by giving every bot the power they were supposed to be born with, and the Autobots, as they are later known, head out to a new adventure in defending their planet against any threats, thus ending the hero's journey and starting another one. Of course, Orion's arc has further depth than just this standard hero's journeys format. His starting point and beliefs play a role in how his arc pan out. He believed that he and others like him are capable of so much more, and he does what he can to prove that, even though he is put down by everyone around him, including D16. Early on, this was semi-portrayed as a selfish characteristic of Pax, as he constantly drags D16 into his schemes and has to get bailed out of tricky situations. However, later on, this was portrayed more as a selfless trait, as his blind optimism, in the words of Alita, is what ultimately leads to Pax eventually defeating Sentinel, earning the Matrix of leadership, and restoring the flow of Energon across Cybertron. Although, the ironic thing about the end of Orion's arc and transformation into Optimus Prime was that it would not have been possible without D16's arc to become Megatron. I guess that leads us to D16 and his arc throughout this movie. Compared to Orion Pax, their arcs are surprisingly similar for about half of the movie. D16 also started in a similar spot as a low-ranking mining bot. He was then pulled into an adventure where he learns about the dark truth. Together with Orion, Alita, and B, they set out to overthrow Sentinel. Of course, the main difference between Orion and D was how they would go about it. While Orion's priority was to expose Sentinel for the type of ruler he is and reform society to make it better for as many bots as possible, D's priority was to get revenge against Sentinel for taking away everything he was supposed to have, and he wanted him to suffer the cruel life that he had, but worse. In a way, that's actually a sense of irony in the arcs of these characters. Orion started out being somewhat self-centered, as he was the one seeking adventure, wanting to prove that he can be so much more, and he drags his friend against his will in his crazy schemes. Meanwhile, D16 accepted the status quo, believing that he is doing what he can to contribute to society and make it function. In other words, D16 was willing to give his desire for self-autonomy away to allow the status quo to continue. However, by the halfway point of the film, it became clear that D16 was actually the self-centered character, while Orion was the one being selfless, which makes what D said in the moment of the revelation quite ironic.
Well, that's the whole thing. You're never thinking about anything else, just yourself. Fantastic. Another Orion Pax master plan. I can't wait to hear this.
Now, some critics have said that one of the few flaws of Transformers 1 was that D16's turn for the worse happened a bit too quickly, and that it would have been better if paced a bit slower. Admittedly, when I first watched the film, I kinda felt the same way. But upon rewatching the film again, this criticism seems less valid when you realize that D16 nearly had everything needed to become Megatron from the first few moments we met him. From his earliest moments, D16 was already pretty aggressive as a person, especially around Orion, with him punching him, jokingly saying he'll hit him for the hell of it, and nonchalantly saying he'll kill him for dragging him into the Iacon 5000.
If we survive this, I'm gonna kill you! I accept those terms.
It does seem like an exaggeration, of course, but it did turn out to be foreshadowing for what D16 eventually does to Orion Pax. The fact is that D was already someone who wanted to be more, just like Orion, which would explain why they got along well initially. However, while Orion wanted to be more to help out as many people as possible, D wanted to be more for the sake of his own benefit. He wanted to be like his idol, Megatronus Prime.
The strongest Prime to ever live. I know, buddy.
That meant he wanted to be the most powerful Transformer to exist. All that he was missing was, well, the power. But since he was just a mining bot and was told he could not be more by Sentinel, he just shoved his desires down until it boils over the moment he learned that he was living a lie. This of course led to D wanting vengeance against Sentinel, and that became his priority the moment he was given the power to transform. This critique of D16's arc being too quick is also partly due to the fact that lots of things were happening in the second half of the movie, like the introduction of the High Guard to the numerous fight scenes. Again, I first agreed with this sentiment, but upon rewatching, I realized this was probably intentional. If the movie was slower paced and allowed Orion and D16 to have a long talk, realistically speaking, Orion probably would have convinced D to reconsider his approach and de-escalate. Since there was little time for Orion and D to talk things out, D16's descent to darkness was mostly unopposed. If anything, it was accelerated the moment the High Guard started to follow him. The way the film was paced was done in a way where D16's transformation was all but certain, regardless of how much Orion tried his best to stop it. Ultimately, D16's transformation into Megatron is not something that feels cartoonishly unrealistic compared to the ironically cartoonish evilness of the Decepticons and Megatron in earlier iterations. Now yes, I know that is a very low bar to compare, but again, the live action movies are all that I have seen when it came to this franchise, and I unfortunately haven't had time to watch the animated shows. So to see characters like D16/Megatron actually have a well-written character arc is such a nice breath of fresh air. Also, the thing about Megatron's arc is that something similar to it can happen to anyone. Evilness can come from anyone who has the underlying aggressive desire, and with just a couple of life-changing revelations, they will act upon those desires and force their will to the detriment of everyone. In a standard story, Megatron's arc would have just been viewed as a well-executed, albeit somewhat standard representation of a character becoming a villain. If Orion's arc didn't end the way it did, Megatron would probably just have continued the status quo that Sentinel set up, because how else will they get Energon without the Matrix? He would basically just replace one tyrant with another one, being himself. Fortunately, Transformers is more than just a standard story. Megatron doesn't get the green light to become the tyrannical leader overnight. Thanks to Orion with his beliefs and actions, he became the next Prime, halt Megatron's rise to power, and bring back the flow of Energon, thus improving the society as a whole. This is what I mean by D16's arc needing Orion Pax's arc to be as impactful as it is, and vice versa. On their own, each arc works fine as being standard character arcs for an up-and-coming hero and villain, but when they are put together in the way Transformers 1 did it, you get a story that is somehow more than the sum of its parts. Overall, writing like this is why I think Transformers 1 is painfully underrated, and needs to get more attention whenever possible, so please get others to watch the movie if they have not already. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on this movie and other animated movies generally, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Also, please give this video a like and subscribe for more content like this. With all that said, thank you all for watching this video. I hope you all have a great day. See you in the next one.